Audible messages. Matthew chapter 3, verse 17 says this, "And behold, the voice out of heaven said, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.'" Oftentimes, it comes with vision. So vision would include voice speaking and message along with visual images. Sometimes message is declared apart from any visual pictures. Audible messages in the spiritual realm can involve people speaking words or objects making sounds. So it's not just people or spirits making words, but it's also subjects could make sound. Some people that have had heavenly visitations and they were also able to audibly hear. They said that even objects in heaven were making sound, like the grass. When they stepped on their foot on the grass, it made sound. It made like a musical sound. Different things that they touched, it seemed like everything made sound. So audible messages, those messages we can perceive inside of us by an inner ear, or also outside by a physical ear. Now, outside with the physical ear, now these audible messages, they could happen where we see in the scripture, in the Bible, where God spoke to, the Father spoke to Jesus, "This is my beloved Son." I'm trying to find what the reference is. And some said that it thundered, remember that scripture? And some said that something else, but some said that it thundered, some said they heard the voice, but they couldn't hear or make a distinction of what was said. But it was the Father that was speaking to the Son. So sometimes you are able to hear it actually, physically, and even other people around you can hear it. Or sometimes you are able to hear it clear because you're given understanding, but other people just hear the noise. Sometimes you hear it with your physical ear, but it's actually bypassing your eardrum, meaning there's no actual sound waves being created, but it touches the nerve system that translates the sound, and you hear it in your head as though if you were hearing it audibly. Does that make sense? So without actual sound waves being created. And of course, it could be heard by your inner ear. Voices or sounds we hear internally can indeed be messages from the Lord. It's important to note the spiritual hearing that happens in our inner ear is one that can be practiced and developed, much like a pictorial or like pictorial vision. It's a part of our spiritual senses that we can learn to tune in into what God is saying and learn from victories and mistakes. That which we hear outside of us, messages from above and beyond the natural mind or ear, is called a supernatural audible messages. And that's the one we're talking about. Supernatural audible messages from the Lord cannot be practiced or developed, but they are just the things that God gives by divine providence. So that's what we're talking about, the audible messages and audible voice that we hear from outside of our mind. Those we cannot necessarily practice. We can just pay attention when God speaks. And as we pay attention and God sees that we're paying attention, God will use those methods because He sees that we're paying attention and listening. Oftentimes He will repeatedly use those methods because He knows that we will not miss it. We will listen to it. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to share my story. One of the times that I heard audibly the Lord speak to me. And those of you that have been watching me for a while, you probably already heard this story a couple of times. But for the sake of those that are rewatching in the future and those that have not heard the story, I want to share it. One night, as it was still when I was ministering Wednesday in the morning in Hungry Gen online church. one night from Tuesday to Wednesday, I woke up right before 2 o'clock and I heard somebody weeping, and I heard it audibly. So I have 3 kids, so I thought, well, maybe that's one of my kids that is crying, but it was like this deep sobbing. So I'm thinking maybe they had a nightmare or they had some kind of a bad dream or something. So I woke up, I turned over to see my wife was still sleeping. So I left our room and I went to our children's room. When I got to the room, now while I'm going there, I'm still hearing the audible voice, audible sobbing, crying, this deep, deep cry. When I get to the room, I get to first room, I see that 2 of my kids are sleeping sound and nobody's crying, while I'm still hearing this sobbing cry, this deep wailing. So I leave that room, I go to my youngest daughter's room, and I was like, no, there's no way that she could be crying, because that sounds more like an adult crying. But just in case, I went in her room. She's asleep. She's asleep and sound. And I was like, that's weird. Then I started being perplexed. And I was like, well, was it my wife? I just didn't notice that my wife maybe is crying. Maybe she's crying in her dream, in her sleep, whatever. So I'm making my way down to our bedroom again to see maybe my wife is crying, to see what is wrong. And I've started to pay attention, because at first I wasn't noticing. As I'm moving from place to place, the consistency of the voice stays the same. The consistency of the sobbing stays the same, which is weird, because if you were coming close to the object that's making sound, you'll hear it louder, and as you're moving away, you'll hear it less audible, right? That's be normal progression. But as I'm moving around the house, I don't have a small house, it stays consistent, and I'm hearing it. So I kind of felt like it was weird, but then I was like double checking. I'm going to go and check on my wife. Maybe she's crying. I come to the room. My wife is asleep as she could be. So then I'm starting to freak out. Who is in my house? I'm like, all of a sudden, this like, almost like adrenaline kicked in. And I'm still hearing the sound. I was like, what's going on? Now I'm carefully like looking out the doors before I enter the room. I went through all the house again. And as I'm searching the house, now, mind you, this is going on for about 5 minutes now. I'm walking in my underwear, looking, hoping that nobody jumps at me. And as I walked through it, I went to the pantry, I went to the closets. I can't find anybody weeping. So I'm thinking, maybe there's somebody outside that is crying so loud that I hear it on the inside. But it's like, that can't be, because I literally hear it in the house. I kind of peeked out of the windows in different rooms. I did not see anybody. So then I'm like, this is so strange. So now I'm like fully awake. Adrenaline is pumping. I'm making my way down, and I get to the living room, and I kind of stop, and I said, Lord, is this you? And the moment I asked, Lord, this is you, and I literally heard the voice, said, yes, this is me. And the fear of the Lord came upon me. I'm like, oh my God, this is first. I've never had that before. This was new to me. I said, Lord, what are you saying to me? What am I hearing? And then literally I heard him say, this morning as you're going to be ministering, there's a person that is sobbing and crying, and they're praying for their sister because this and this problem. And as you're going to be live streaming, I want you to call her out. Tell her what I told you and minister to her. She needs deliverance, and her family needs deliverance. Now, I'm hearing all of these things audibly. I look at the clock. It's exactly 2 o'clock. And as soon as he finished talking, it disappeared. I heard it no more. I was like, wow, this is crazy. I'm still baffled by this whole experience. I go back to sleep. I'm trying to go back to sleep. For a while, I'm just trying to process what was this whole thing about. I've never heard it audibly but this time I've already been practicing prophetic for a while. I know what it's like to hear God with your inner ear, in your inner self. But this was absolutely physical, audible experience. So I go live at 10 o'clock, as I usually do, 10 in the morning. I minister. I completely, during the ministry time, space out and forget about the experience that I heard, the audible voice from the Lord. And I was already giving my greetings. As I was about to wrap up a stream, the Lord reminded me of that thing that happened in the middle of the night. I said, wait, before you guys dismiss you, there's a person here that is watching, a woman. Last night, the Lord woke me up. I shared the experience. I said, the Lord opened my ears to hear you in your room as you were crying. I literally heard you audibly. And this is what the Lord is saying. This is what you're praying for. And the Lord told me to pray for you, to deliver you, and deliver your sister, and everything will be okay after that. So I just left it be out there. I wasn't sure if anybody was going to respond or not. And then all of a sudden, this person on YouTube responds, yes, this is me, exactly at 2 o'clock, your time. You're right. I was praying. I didn't even pray because I had no words to pray. I was just sobbing deeply and crying. And yes, this is exactly the problem is, how can you pray for me? So I told her, go on Zoom. She got on Zoom and she confirmed everything I said, and I prayed for her. She received deliverance. I believe her family and her sister received deliverance. Never heard back from her since as far as the testimony. So if you're watching, it was you who received that prayer. I would like to know what happened and what the Lord did in your life. But this was the experience. So the Lord can speak to us audibly.